When you buy a fire extinguisher for your kitchen, you do it with a very specific expectation, right? Like, you expect that if a grease fire breaks out, you just pull the pin, squeeze the handle, and it blankets the flames.
Right. I mean, it's your ultimate insurance policy.
Exactly. But imagine your kitchen actually catches fire, the flames are, climbing the cabinets, and you grab the extinguisher, squeeze the handle, and instead of foam, the canister just shatters into dust in your hands.
Wow. Yeah, the insurance policy just becomes another casualty of the crisis.
Right.
And that image perfectly captures the macroeconomic paradox and the sources you've shared for this deep dive.
Yeah, because we are looking at the financial reality of April 2026, and the data paints a picture of a world completely on fire.
Literally and figuratively, yeah. We have
Yeah.
this massive regional war involving Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is blockaded. Oil has violently spiked past $113 a barrel, and inflation is creeping right back up.
Which, by every traditional metric, is the exact environment where gold is supposed to skyrocket.
Exactly. It's supposed to be the ultimate safe haven.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if the world is on fire, why are investors dumping the one asset that's supposed to be fireproof? According to the data, gold just suffered this historic, brutal crash.
Yeah, we're talking about a 14% drop. It fell from an all-time high of $5,600 an ounce down to around $4,300.
Just wild. And silver took an even worse beating, right? Plummeting like 28%.
It did. So the mission for our deep dive today is to really analyze the mechanics behind that massive failure. We're going to look at why gold crashed during a geopolitical nightmare, how the market has totally fractured into this paper reality versus a physical reality.
And how the overarching threat of 2026 stagflation is actively rewriting all the established rules of wealth preservation for you listening.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So I want to start with the most glaring contradiction here. If the global supply chain is choking and war is breaking out, why dump the crisis insurance?
Well, the answer lies in the domino effect. Because markets, they don't price assets in a vacuum. To understand the gold crash, we have to follow the causal chain of macroeconomic dominoes.
Right, and the first one tipped over in the Strait of Hormuz?
Exactly. When that blockade went into effect, it instantly cut off roughly 20% of the global petroleum supply.
Which naturally sent oil prices into the stratosphere, hitting that $113 a barrel mark. And for you listening, the immediate translation of that is the national average gas price jumping to $3.45 a gallon.
Yeah, and that isn't just an annoyance at the pump. It fundamentally alters the cost of literally everything transported, manufactured, or grown.
It creates a massive inflationary wave.
A huge one. The sources point specifically to core PCE inflation. Now, PCE stands for personal consumption expenditures, and we should pause here because it's the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation metric.
Oh, right. Because unlike the standard CPI, which assumes a fixed basket of goods, PCE accounts for consumer substitution, right?
Yep, exactly. So if beef gets too expensive, PCE assumes you just buy chicken instead. It's a slightly softer metric, but the crazy thing is, it has been stubbornly stuck at 3.0% for 5 consecutive years.
Which is well above the Fed's 2% target.
Right. And with oil spiking, this already sticky inflation metric suddenly threatened to surge toward 4.5%.
Oof. Which puts the Federal Reserve in an absolutely impossible position.
It totally paralyzed them. The sources refer to this resulting paralysis as the Warsh shock.
The war shock.
Yeah. It describes a scenario where the market suddenly realizes the central bank is entirely trapped. Like the Fed cannot cut interest rates to stimulate the weakening economy without pouring gasoline on a 4.5% inflation fire.
But they also can't raise rates to crush inflation without devastating the labor market.
Exactly. And that realization that the Fed could not rescue the market caused real yields to climb toward 2%, and it pushed the 10-year Treasury yield past 4.25%.
Wait, help me out here. I'm trying to view this from the perspective of an institutional investor. Gold is supposed to protect my purchasing power against inflation, right?
That's the theory, yeah.
So if inflation is threatening to hit 4.5% and the government is offering me a 4.25% yield on a treasury bond, I am technically losing money in real terms if I buy that bond.
Right.
So why would a negative real return cause institutional money to dump gold? It doesn't make sense.
Well, that is a really crucial distinction. You have to consider the concept of opportunity cost alongside these institutional mandates. You see, gold pays zero interest. it generates no yield.
Okay.
So when you are managing billions of dollars and your models previously assumed interest rates were heading back to zero, a sudden spike in guaranteed nominal yields to 4.25% just fundamentally breaks your models.
Oh, wow. So they have to adjust immediately.
Yeah, institutions are forced to rotate capital into cash and short-term debt simply because the opportunity cost of holding non-yielding bullion becomes mathematically untenable for their quarterly balance sheets.
It's like choosing between a savings account that pays you and a heavy rock that just sits there doing nothing.
That is a great way to put it. But the narrative in the sources makes it very clear that this rotation out of gold was not some polite, orderly reallocation of assets.
No, it was a panicked, forced liquidation. And to understand why, we really have to look at how investors actually hold gold today. We're talking at the paper gold market.
Right. The paper market is where the illusion of the safe haven completely shattered, because the vast majority of investors, they don't hold physical gold bars in a vault.
Right, they hold gold ETFs, exchange-traded funds, or they trade futures contracts.
Exactly. And the defining characteristic of these paper markets is leverage.
Let's illustrate how that leverage actually triggered the crash for you listening. Imagine you own a house, right? And you're current on all your mortgage payments. But your neighbor's house burns down, and the bank suddenly faces a massive cash shortage across its entire portfolio.
Yeah, bad news.
So the bank calls you up and says, hey, we need you to pay off your entire mortgage by tomorrow morning, or we are taking your house. That is essentially what a margin call feels like in the financial markets.
It's terrifying. And right before the gold crash, equity markets tanked because of the war escalation. Hedge funds and retail investors faced catastrophic losses in their stock portfolios.
And because they trade on margin, meaning they borrow money from their brokers to buy those stocks, the brokers demanded immediate cash to cover those massive losses.
Exactly. And faced with an existential margin call, investor can't choose to sell the assets that are plummeting in value. I mean, there are no buyers. They are forced to sell their most liquid winning assets.
And gold ETFs fit that description perfectly. They didn't sell their paper gold because they lost faith in the metal. They sold it because they desperately needed the liquidity to save their broader portfolios.
That's the key right there. And the scale of that panic is staggering. Western gold ETFs bled $11 billion in just the first 3 weeks of March 2026.
11 billion. That was the fastest liquidation wave in over a decade.
Yeah. The sources note that this mass exodus was absorbed by the COMEX futures market. But we should probably clarify what COMEX actually is, because it played a dual role here.
Yeah, COMEX is the primary derivatives market for trading metals. When you trade on COMEX, you aren't trading physical gold, you're trading futures contracts, which are just agreements to buy or sell gold at a specific price at a future date.
Right. And it trades roughly 27 million ounces daily. So that massive depth provided the necessary liquidity. It basically allowed investors to cash out of their $11 billion ETF positions without triggering a complete system-breaking flash crash.
It prevented the system from breaking, sure, but it still facilitated a 14% plunge. Holding a gold ETF is like holding a claim check for a coat at a burning restaurant.
Oh, that's good.
Right, you don't actually have the coat to keep you warm, you just have a piece of paper and a failing system.
The contrast is absolute. Because if you hold a physical gold bar in a private vault, no broker can force you to liquidate it just because your tech stocks collapsed.
Physical gold cannot be margin called.
Exactly. The paper market crash was a symptom of systemic deleveraging, not a rejection of the underlying asset itself.
Which naturally forces us to look at the physical market. Normally, when Western funds are dumping gold by the billions, global central banks, the whales of the market, step in to buy the dip.
Yeah, they've been accumulating gold for years to diversify away from the US dollar.
But during this crisis, they just vanished. Where were they?
Well, the geopolitical shock of the Iran conflict directly neutralized those sovereign buyers. Take the Gulf states, right? Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait. Their massive sovereign wealth funds are built on petrodollars.
Right, and the mechanics of the petrodollar system are pretty straightforward. They sell their oil globally, receive US dollars in exchange, and then use those surplus dollars to purchase assets like treasury bonds and physical gold.
But the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz completely broke that mechanism. If the oil cannot leave the Gulf, the dollars stop flowing in.
Makes sense.
And without that incoming cash flow, their capacity to purchase gold evaporated overnight. In some cases, the sources indicate these nations actually had to sell portions of their existing gold reserves simply to generate the liquidity needed to meet their domestic obligations during the crisis.
Okay, the Gulf states were cut off, but what about China? I mean, they are a massive importer of oil, not an exporter, and they have been one of the most aggressive buyers of gold on the planet.
Right, but China experienced the other side of the crisis, what economists call a terms of trade shock.
A terms of trade shock.
Yeah. The terms of trade represent the ratio between a country's export prices and its import prices. When oil spiked to $113, the cost of China's energy imports skyrocketed.
Oh, so they were forced to spend a significantly larger portion of their existing dollar reserves just to keep their factories running and the lights on.
Exactly. That massive expenditure shrank their trade surplus, which left far fewer dollars available to allocate toward gold accumulation. So the structural floor that these sovereign buyers had built under the gold market, it simply vanished.
The absence of central banks combined with the panic in Western ETFs creates a pretty grim picture. But here's where it gets really interesting. The sources reveal a massive, almost unbelievable disconnect when we look at the retail and physical level.
It's wild. While the West was furiously dumping paper gold, the East was actively scrambling for the physical metal.
The divergence between paper and physical is profound. During the exact same month that $11 billion fled Western ETFs, Indian local ETFs saw $560 million in inflows.
Although, the data does provide important nuance regarding India.
Right, the $30 discount.
Yeah. Despite the ETF inflows, physical gold in India was actually trading at a $30 discount.
Yeah.
This was driven by weak seasonal demand and high local dealer inventories, which just shows that the global physical market is not entirely uniform.
Right, but then you look at the situation in China and it was even more extreme. The demand for actual physical gold became so desperate that it traded at a massive $30 per ounce premium over the London spot price.
Yeah. Investors in Shanghai were willingly paying an extra $30 for every single ounce just to secure the physical metal. They were completely ignoring the plunging paper price on Western screens.
That premium proves that the core demand for the asset remained completely intact. It just decoupled from the leveraged financial system.
Exactly. The West is liquidating paper promises to cover leverage, while the East is paying premiums to hold the physical asset.
And this fracturing of the market is a direct symptom of a much larger, darker economic reality taking hold in 2026. The sources point to the reemergence of stagflation.
Oh, stagflation. It is the absolute worst-case scenario for policymakers. It's the unholy trinity, basically. Stagnant economic growth, rising unemployment, and persistently high inflation.
It just braced the traditional macroeconomic models. We have $113 oil keeping prices sky high, but the underlying economy is actively contracting. Like the February data shows the U.S. lost 92,000 jobs, pushing unemployment up to 4.4%.
And the Federal Reserve's tools are designed to treat one side of that equation at the expense of the other. If the Fed cuts rates to stimulate the economy and save those 92,000 jobs, they inject more liquidity into the system, which just accelerates the inflation.
But if they raise rates to kill the inflation, they intentionally trigger a severe recession and massive job losses.
Right. It's a lose-lose. The sources repeatedly compare this to the 1970s, which was the last time the global economy faced entrenched stagflation. And during that decade, gold soared 2,300%.
2,300%. Wow.
Yeah. Eventually, Fed Chair Paul Volcker famously hiked interest rates to 20% to break the back of inflation.
But wait, we can't just run the 1970s Volcker playbook today, right? I mean, we have $36 trillion in national debt, with interest alone costing over $1 trillion a year.
Exactly.
So if the Fed raised rates to 20% now, wouldn't the whole system just implode?
Oh, the math simply does not allow for a modern Volcker shock. In the 1970s, global debt levels relative to GDP were a fraction of what they are today. If the Fed attempted to raise rates to those levels now, the cost of servicing that $36 trillion debt would instantly bankrupt the government.
It would detonate the global financial system.
Literally. The central bank has no runaway. And that constraint is exactly why the 2026 stagflationary trap is uniquely dangerous.
And that stagflationary reality also perfectly explains the silver paradox we mentioned earlier. Silver dropped 28%, falling twice as hard as gold.
Yeah, poor silver.
Because silver possesses a dual identity, right? It's considered a monetary precious metal, but roughly half of its global demand is industrial.
Right, it's a critical component in solar panels, electronics, electric vehicles. And because stagflation inherently involves a contraction in economic growth and a slowdown in global manufacturing, the industrial demand for silver evaporated almost overnight.
So silver suffered from the same liquidity and margin call pressures as gold on the monetary side, while simultaneously facing a total collapse in demand on the industrial side.
Yep, it got squeezed from both ends.
So, given this seemingly impossible macro environment where war triggers margin calls, central banks are paralyzed, and the physical market is detaching from the paper market, how should you actually interpret the price action?
Right, when does it become a buy again?
Exactly. If gold crashes the moment a geopolitical crisis actually erupts, what is the strategy here?
Well, the sources provide a stunning historical data point that flips the conventional narrative right on its head. Gold actually jumped 23.9% in the 30 days before the Iran airstrikes even occurred.
Wait, really?
Yeah, the market priced in the fear of the war before the first shot was even fired.
That is wild.
And the historical precedent aligns perfectly. If you look back at the 1979 Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, gold surged 25.6% prior to the tanks rolling across the border.
So the smart money playbook is to buy the rumor, sell the crisis. You price in the geopolitical fear before the conflict ignites.
Exactly, because once the war actually begins, the equity markets react, the margin calls hit, the liquidity crisis takes over, and that forced selling begins.
Okay, so if we are currently in the middle of that liquidity-driven sell-off, what are the indicators we need to watch to know when gold will rally again?
The analysis highlights two specific metrics you really must monitor. The first is real interest rates, specifically represented by the 10-year TIPS-S yield. And TIPS stands for Treasury Inflation Protected Securities.
Right, and by factoring in inflation, the TIPS yield gives us the real return an investor makes, rather than just the nominal rate on paper.
Precisely. Measuring that real return is absolutely essential. Currently, real rates are positive, which creates that opportunity cost headwind for gold we discussed earlier.
Right, the savings account versus the heavy rock.
Yes, exactly. However, as the labor market continues to shed jobs, the Fed will eventually be forced to capitulate and cut rates to prevent a depression. When those real rates start dropping and approach zero, the opportunity cost vanishes and gold becomes highly attractive again.
Okay, got it. And the second metric.
The US dollar index, known as the DXY. Gold and the dollar have a historical inverse correlation, typically between -0.5 and -0.8.
Because gold is priced globally in dollars.
Exactly. When a war panic initially breaks out, global capital floods into the US dollar for perceived safety. That strong dollar makes gold more expensive for foreign buyers, which creates massive downward pressure on the price. So a weakening dollar is a prerequisite for a sustained gold rally.
So what does this all mean for you listening? It means you have to separate the short-term market mechanics from the long-term fundamentals.
For sure.
Gold crashes in the liquidity phase, just like it did in the 2008 financial crisis and the 2020 COVID panic, and now in April 2026. Institutions just dump everything they can to raise cash.
But history shows that the asset rips higher during the monetary debasement phase that inevitably follows.
Right, when central banks are forced to step in, lower rates, and flood the system with liquidity to save the economy. So the 2026 gold crash isn't a failure of gold itself.
No, not at all. It is a symptom of a highly leveraged financial system desperately deleveraging and a paralyzed Federal Reserve caught in a stagflationary trap.
Understanding the profound difference between owning a financial claim like a paper ETF inextricably tied to a failing system and owning a physical asset outside that system is the absolute key to surviving this kind of volatility.
Absolutely. And this fracturing of paper and physical assets leads to a final, really fascinating, completely unresolved question embedded in the sources.
Oh, wow.
Throughout this historic stagflation crisis, the role of Bitcoin is being heavily contested.
Ah, right. It's constantly touted as digital gold, the ultimate decentralized safe haven.
Yet, sitting at $67,500, it has behaved much more like a high-risk tech stock during this immediate panic phase than a true safe haven. Yeah, the behavior of Bitcoin forces us to ask, if the global market is desperately fleeing paper derivatives and paying massive premiums to hold tangible physical assets, where does a purely digital asset fit in?
Right. Like, in a prolonged stagflation scenario, will Bitcoin ultimately decouple from equity markets and prove itself as the new digital safe haven? Or, because it exists entirely within the digital financial infrastructure, will it suffer the exact same liquidity-driven liquidation as those paper gold ETFs?
It is the defining debate for the next era of wealth preservation.
Something for you to definitely mull over. Keep questioning the headlines, look for the underlying mechanics beneath the market panic, and we'll see you next time on the Deep Dive.